The Berlin Crisis, also called the Berlin Blockade, began in June 1948 and ended in May 1949. It was one of the crises of the Cold War, during which the Soviet Union blocked the accession to Berlin for the Western Allies. They later created the Berlin Airlift in response to the Soviet Union.
There were two different protagonists that provoked the Berlin blockade. On one side, there was the West Bloc, composed of the United States, France and Great Britain. On the other side, there was the West Bloc, mainly composed of the USSR.
After the Yalta and Potsdam agreements that were signed in 1945, Germany was divided into four zones, each occupied by the victorious Allied power: Great Britain, the Soviet Union, the USA, and France. The capital, which was located in the Soviet area, was also divided into four zones. East Berlin was part of the Soviet zone, while West Berlin was controlled by the Western Allies.
The division led to conflicts between the main actors, Winston Churchill, Harry Truman, and Joseph Stalin, who could not reach to an agreement regarding the administering of Germany. For instance, the USA and Great Britain wanted to rebuild Germany and strengthen its economy, while the USSR, on the other hand, wanted to weaken the country. This opposition was probably at the root of the Berlin Crisis.
Moreover, the reforms taken by the Allies in order to contain communism caused the crisis. In 1947, the USA and Great Britain united the German zones and called it Bisonia, which France joined later. A year later, on March the 31st, the United States introduced the Marshall Aid that only helped the western part of Germany. For economic purpose, a new currency, called the Dutch mark, was established in Bisonia and in West Germany, where they wanted to create the new country. Stalin saw these measures as an attempt to weaken the USSR.
Therefore, in March 1948, he left the ACC, the Allied Control Council, which was in charge of the governing of the four German zones. Then, on June the 24th, he closed the borders to West Berlin. All the railways lines, the roads and maritime routes were blocked off. Stalin wanted to stop the worsening expansion in Germany and show that the Soviet Union had also power. He also blocked all accesses to West Berlin in order to stop and protest against the escape of many people from East Germany and East Berlin to West Berlin, a richer and more free zone.
The only way the Allies could access Berlin was by plane. They used the Berlin Airlift in order to avoid a Third World War, but also to help the starving population living in the West Berlin. In less than 1 year, millions of tons of goods, food, gasoline, etc. were sent there. On the one hand, the Berlin Airlift was a success for the capitalist countries and a symbol for the Western freedom. On the other hand, the blockade was a failure for the Soviet Union. As a result, the crisis ended in May 1949.
This crisis had several consequences. At first, it led to the creation of NATO by the USA, who were convinced that the economic resources needed to stop communism were not enough. Using military forces was also necessary to protect the Allied countries from a Soviet attack.
Furthermore, it marked the separation of Germany into two states by the Iron Curtain. The idea of Iron Curtain comes from a declaration made by Churchill, and it designates the separation of Germany and Europe between capitalist West and communism. This Iron Curtain has nothing to do with the Berlin Wall erected in 1961.
The Federal Republic of Germany, created on May the 8th, was located in West Germany. This part was richer and capitalist, and its capital was Bonn. The eastern part was created on October the 12th and was called the German Democratic Republic. Its capital was East Berlin, and it was communist and poor.
Eventually, the Berlin crisis deteriorated the relationships between the USSR and the Allies, who embarked upon an arms race.
As a conclusion, the Berlin crisis did not only mark the division inside Germany, but also the opposition between the Soviet Union and Western Allies,